stand for me? Okay, great. But how many of you guys with your chapters use a form of communication? I'm expecting almost every hand in here to be raised because do you ever email your members? That's communications at its baseline. So my name is Alicia Seggelink, and I am a second-year medical student at Chicago Medical School. If I had to be honest, I started shaking about this 6 presentations ago, and I'll probably stop around 14 minutes, so bear with me. But like I just mentioned, all organizations communicate. If you have flyers, monthly newsletters, reports, anything like that, you're communicating. But are you really being strategic with that? Can you all see? Okay. So your chapter probably sits down and sets priorities, when you elect your new board and things like that. Plans for utilizing your resources and really achieving your vision. A communication strategy in particular looks at one specific thing. It looks at who you're trying to reach, what you're really trying to tell them, and then what results are you trying to achieve from that. So this presentation is really going to be a super brief overview. I'm going to try and glide through things and make it as simple as possible. But an overview of how to just create a communication strategy for your chapter. And it's truly something that your chapter can use to be successful in your goals and therefore help you be more sustainable. So what is communications? Communications is connecting your audience with the message you're delivering so that it's received, understood, and acted upon, which was really interesting because I feel like a lot of people have been talking about this, and even in, because my brain doesn't work, this last presentation, he mentioned the action axiom. It's really about that next step. So communications, like I said, comes in a variety of formats, and it can be super complex, like putting out a newsletter, but it's really as simple as putting the logo on something that goes out. So what is communications planning? It's really the process to help you reach that goal. So like I said, communications planning is a process to help you reach your goals and objectives for your chapter. It gives you a framework for deciding if that student that comes along with the next big idea, for you to consider if that idea fits within your plan and if you have the resources to address it, if you already have a strategy in place. A communication strategy really helps you to communicate effectively. It improves the quality of your efforts. It expands the return on your investment, and probably that's time and effort, not really money. I don't know about you guys. We don't have money in our chapter. And then it helps you evaluate your success. Developing a strategy is really taking a more strategic and professional approach to how your chapter operates. So I want to take a moment to introduce you to the concept of communications as an integral part of your chapter's success. So this would essentially be your chapter. You have, your mission and vision, which really drive everything you guys are doing as a chapter, right? And like I said, you may or may not have a strategic plan. I know our chapter doesn't officially have a strategic plan, but we've talked about goals, things we want to do, how many members we want to hope to get, and things like that. Essentially, that's our strategic plan. It's just not official. So wherever you fall on that, I obviously have my opinions on whether you should have one or not. But lo and behold, I'm sure most of you have something of the sort. And within that plan and your strategy for your chapter is where your communication strategy would fall. And I'm going to zoom through this actually. And a subpart of that would be your web strategy. And this would actually include a lot of different platforms. So all your digital things, website, Facebook, social media, those types of things. And then a smaller part of a web strategy would include your social media plan. Now I think a lot of people, when I talk about communications or say the word communications, people are like, oh yeah, like Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. But communications in and of itself includes way more than that. Like I said, it's flyers you put out at the university. You're communicating with someone, right? And you're trying to send them a message. Yes, if you have a website, things like that. And then, like I said too, it includes your internal communications. When you're emailing members, you're emailing between chapters, or you're trying to communicate in some other way. That's all included. I also want to mention that I purposefully use plan and strategy different. I know some people, if you look at stuff out there, they use them interchangeably. But I think that a plan is more about the tools that you're using and the actual implementation, like a schedule for when to post Facebook posts and things like that. Whereas a strategy is really more about the why and the how you're using your tools, and then how each of your tools kind of works together to achieve your goals and objectives, which we're going to talk about later. I hope that this diagram just demonstrates how a communication strategy is connected to the bigger picture. It's not about having a communication strategy just to have one. It really must have a connection to both your chapter's overall strategic plan, or some version of it, and your mission and vision. So we're going to very briefly talk through 5 steps to creating a communication strategy. So I really hope I distilled this down, so stop me if anything's crazy. All right. So research is probably the most important step of creating a communication strategy for an organization. What you're really trying to do is gather all of the necessary information to make strategic decisions about your audience, your key messages, and your use of resources and tools. There's really no single way to conduct research, and it may vary based on a lot of different factors, but it's really helpful to just take a moment, step back, and 1, try to figure out what your chapter needs to make decisions about communications, and then 2, how to pull together that information. I have a suggestion that I think works for chapters, but we're not going to talk about it, but you can ask me if you want. So the next section of your chapter's communication strategy is really where you establish what you're striving to achieve. Defining your goals and objectives will help you really figure out the who, what, when, where, why, and that's what's important. So to do this, you're going to want to make sure you have goals and objectives. Goals really are more long-term overall changes that you're hoping to cause, whereas your objectives are a little bit more short-term, measurable steps that you can take to reach that goal. So I have some examples here. A goal for your chapter might be to raise awareness of first and second year medical students for our chapter's unique role on campus. Okay, great, but how do we get there? An objective could be to increase by 100%, there should be commas there, I'm sorry, the number of first and second year medical students who like our Facebook page by the end of 2016. And typically, you'll have a few different objectives to meet each goal. A common pitfall for people is not making objectives measurable. So I really just want to touch on this very briefly. But being measurable is one of the most important criteria for an objective. That's how you determine if you've been successful. Admittedly, measuring communications seems really difficult, but it's not impossible, and it's really necessary. Try to avoid quantity for the sake of quantity. A large number of Facebook fans who like your page doesn't really matter if it only includes a few of the people you're actually trying to reach, right? And even if all the people who do like your page are the demographic you're trying to reach, if you're not engaging them the right way, you might not actually be succeeding in what your goals are. And we're actually not going to talk about engaging your audiences too much either, but that's just something to keep in mind. Also bear in mind that some of the best measurements for your objectives are more operational. For example, have more students become members of the chapter, and is registration for some campus event filling up sooner than it normally does? So really, this next step, if you distill it down as simple as possible, who do you want to reach? Those are your target audiences. And what do you really want to say? Those are your key messages. So critical to the success of any communications piece is identifying who you want to reach. This step can be as straightforward or complex as you make it, bearing in mind that the better you define who your audience or audiences are, the more successful you're going to be in your communications. One group that is not your audience is everybody. If you try to reach everybody at all the same time, you're really not going to be successful at reaching anybody. It's also really difficult to effectively and efficiently reach a wide range of audiences, especially with limited resources, which I imagine is a lot of our chapters. So you need to set priorities on which audiences you're trying to reach, and is this where your initial, oh my gosh, what did I just say? Sorry. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're setting priorities on who you're trying to reach, but also this is where your original research can really help you. So that initial step will help kind of drive who, are we reaching the right people? Having multiple audiences is actually fine. So I just said, oh, you can't reach everybody. But defining different audiences is actually good for you, and it's probably necessary. Normally, a specific platform of communications will have one, maybe two audiences, and this goes the same for specific campaigns that you might have. However, your overarching communication strategy, which I'm talking about, in that you really need to identify all of the key audiences that you're trying to reach without essentially identifying everybody and then not assigning the same priority to all of them. And then finally, I want to address the term audience. This term is normally described or used to describe something passive. Typically, an audience is presented information that it receives, and hopefully we're saying, that you're going to act on that. I don't know, you're my audience right now. It seems kind of passive, right? Like you're just staring at me. However, with the emergence of social media, and I'm just using one example, with the emergence of it as a useful tool for people, the audience is no longer passive. There's a lot of dynamic conversations that are happening in this sphere. And so when you're thinking about who your audiences are going to be, it's also important that you be mindful of what you mean when you say audience and consider how you're going to be interacting with that audience. So taking into consideration your goals and objectives and your desired audiences, it's now time to kind of develop or identify the ideas or the sets of ideas that you want to communicate. These are messages that you decide are important enough to be featured across the tools and tactics of your communication strategy for your chapter. I really want to focus on the development of this strategy and not like the implementation so much, but I do want you to keep two separate things in mind in this development stage. You want to make sure that you're developing key messages. Well, first you're going to develop the key messages that you want your audiences to hear. You may want to have different key messages for different populations, and that's okay. But you want to make sure that there's continuity across your messages or across your audiences so that you ensure that your messaging is consistent. You don't want a few of your audiences thinking you're about something and then other audiences thinking you're about something else. The point when you're using messaging is not that you always have to use your key message word for word. That's not why you develop your messages. It's about communicating the idea to your audiences. So for example, and I'm just going to give like a really simple example, if our key message was our chapter educates students about healthcare policy, let's say. Instead of using that phrase every single time, like it's going to get tired. So all you have to do is post, a picture from an event and say, students at such and such university, sitting through a lecture by Dr. So-and-so about his experience of XYZ and its impact on ABC, right? Really all that in that picture, which is obviously worth 1,000 words, said exactly what my message was without using those same words. And that can be really effective. This really sends the message without using the exact wording, and the test is whether your message was understood and received. So now is kind of the point where you select the tools that you want to use to deliver your key messages to your target audiences. Picking your communications tools and tactics is a very important part of your strategy. You want to keep things in mind like, is this tool going to help us achieve our goals? Is it even practical given our resources, which we're going to talk about? And is it the most effective vehicle for reaching that target audience? After you've selected your tools and tactics, it's really helpful to have a timeline to set benchmarks for implementation, and also ensure that your plan is doable. Having a timetable can really help you stay organized, manage your workload and everything, which at this stage of your education, it's probably super important. Finally, if your chapter's like ours, like I said, financial support isn't necessarily a luxury that you can afford to spend on things like communications. So consider how to use the actual resources that are available to you. So yeah, that's you on the executive officers board, but maybe you can develop a committee within your members to help you do this. Don't, pass on the idea of maybe reaching out to your marketing department at your university. Be realistic about what you can do and like the speed and ease of the tool that you're trying to use and how that affects your resources. Set priorities based on how you can really get the best bang for your buck. And again, I don't really mean buck like dollars, because I don't know, our chapter just doesn't have that. All right. Evaluation really is the final step for creating a communication strategy for your chapter, and it's really how you're going to know if you've reached success. Therefore, you'll want your communication strategy to define what your criteria are for success. And to do so, you really want to look back at your goals and objectives that we set in step 2. So look back at those and ask yourself, how will we know if we achieved our objectives? How will we identify if we've made progress towards our goals in our chapter? So if you've set measurable objectives, as we already talked about, it really makes evaluating success that much easier. I also have some, simple ways to handle evaluation, but we won't talk about that. Final takeaways. I really want to point out, and I kind of alluded to this in the beginning, you do not need to have a Facebook page, a website, some other digital media platform to have a communication strategy. Think back to the diagram that I showed you, right? A strategy would apply to any form of communications, and it really is an integral part of what would be your whole strategic plan for your chapter. Also, no matter what you come up with for your chapter, just ensure that it's clear. It doesn't have to be complex, but just make sure that it's clear, and it should be easy to read, understand, and implement by anyone who would have to use it. Finally, there really is no single format or template to creating such a strategy, nor is there one single process to go through. However, what I talked about, like these 5 steps or these 5 really key components of a communication strategy, are pretty common throughout various strategies. But the important thing is that you use a format that works for your chapter. And then anyone, like I said, who needs to use it. I've provided a template that your chapter can use. I put it on the table out there because I figured that would be the easiest for people to access it. It's something that I kind of came up with using a different template, but kind of modified it for really what worked for us. And you can take a look at that to hopefully help guide you guys in developing something like this for your chapter. And then I don't know, I really want some awesome marketing eyes to look at ours, but ideally then I would just like to put it on the BRI website for you guys to look at ours to see what we did, but that might be a little bit far off, but hopefully you'll have that as well. So, what did we really talk about today? 5 steps to creating a communication strategy, which includes doing some type of research and analytics, developing goals and objectives for yourself, figuring out who your target audiences are, and really what messaging you're trying to get out to them. Ensuring that you're communicating for understanding and action, right? That's always the next step. And then evaluating. So finally, I have my email there. It's blocked by the corner, but it's really my name. You guys can reach out to me at any time or email them to get my email, or like, I don't know, if you're a stalker online, you can probably find it. But please reach out to me. I'm really happy to kind of consult on anything communications for your chapter at all. So sorry, thanks for bearing with me. That was great.